What if the most famous lost city in history was never lost at all? For thousands of years, explorers have scoured the oceans, chasing ruins and treasure, but the shocking truth is, they've been searching in the wrong place. The real Atlantis isn't buried under the sea. It's hidden in words, written 2,400 years ago by Plato himself. And when you see what he actually meant, the legend of Atlantis will never look the same again. Part 1. The legend we all know. Before we get to the ancient texts, let's just summon the ghost of Atlantis as we know it today. The popular legend is a powerful one, a grand epic of splendor and ruin that's become a modern myth in its own right. It starts in the vast, uncharted Atlantic Ocean with an island continent, a paradise on Earth. This was Atlantis, an empire supposedly founded not by mortals, but by Poseidon, the god of the sea himself. The story goes that Poseidon fell for a mortal woman, Cleito. To keep her safe, he created a stunning city on a hill, surrounding it with perfect rings of land and water, all connected by massive canals and bridges. This divine connection blessed Atlantis with incredible abundance. The soil was so rich, it gave 2 harvests a year. The island was filled with exotic wildlife, including, as the legend often adds, herds of elephants. Its mountains were threaded with precious metals, gold, silver, and the most mysterious of all, orichalcum, a metal said to glow with a fiery red light. The Atlanteans, being descended from gods, were people of extraordinary talent. They were master engineers, building elaborate harbors, towering temples, and sprawling cities. Their architects built breathtaking structures, including a grand temple to Poseidon covered in silver, with spires of gold and a roof of ivory. They were brilliant navigators who commanded the seas, making them the dominant power of the known world. For generations, they lived in a state of grace. Their divine ancestry guided them. They were wise, noble, and valued virtue more than their immense wealth. But like in all great tragedies, the Golden Age had to end. As generations passed, the divine blood in the Atlanteans thinned out. Their mortal side took over. Greed replaced wisdom, arrogance replaced humility, and a burning hunger for power consumed their noble spirit. They became corrupt and decadent. No longer happy with their island paradise, they gathered their armies and launched a campaign to enslave the world, sweeping across parts of Africa and Europe, seeming unstoppable. But one small, virtuous state stood in their way, an ancient, idealized version of Athens. In a titanic struggle, this small band of defenders, driven by courage, managed to stop the Atlantean war machine. They fought for freedom, not for glory. And then, just as Athens won this incredible victory, the gods, led by Zeus, cast their final judgment on the arrogance of Atlantis. In a single terrible day and night of violent earthquakes and floods, the divine punishment came down. The earth itself gave way. The magnificent island of Atlantis, with all its splendor, its mighty armies, and its corrupt people, was swallowed by the sea, vanishing completely. It left behind only a muddy shoal, a scar on the ocean, and a warning to all of humanity about the dangers of pride. This is the legend that has echoed through time, a fantastic, compelling story. And it's almost entirely a product of our imagination, built on a huge misunderstanding of what Plato was trying to tell us. Part 2. The single source, introducing Plato. To find the real Atlantis, we have to go back in time. Not 11,000 years to a mythical age, but to ancient Athens, around the year 360 BC. This is where our story really begins, in the mind of one of the most influential thinkers in all of history, the philosopher, Plato. And here is the single most important fact about Atlantis, the one that changes everything. Every single original mention of Atlantis in the entire ancient world comes from just 2 of Plato's works. Not from Herodotus, the father of history, not from Homer's epics, not from any Egyptian hieroglyph or Mesopotamian tablet. The entire legend, from the city's name to its violent end, comes only from two of Plato's philosophical dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. Any claim, any map, any theory that doesn't start and end with what Plato wrote is pure speculation. So, who was this guy, and why was he writing about a sunken city? Plato wasn't a historian. He was a philosopher, a student of the great Socrates, and a teacher of Aristotle. He lived in turbulent times. He had seen his home city of Athens rise to glorious heights, only to be crushed in the devastating Peloponnesian War against Sparta. He saw the corruption of politics and watched his mentor, Socrates, be executed by the very democracy he was meant to serve. These events shaped everything he thought. Plato spent his life wrestling with the biggest questions you can imagine. What is justice? What is truth? What's the best way to govern a society? He wrote in the form of dialogues, which are basically philosophical conversations between Socrates and other prominent figures. These weren't just transcripts. They were carefully crafted stories designed to explore complex ideas. He famously used analogies and fables to make his points, like the allegory of the cave. This context is everything. Plato was a philosopher using stories to teach, not a pulp novelist looking for a bestseller. His goal was to make you think. The story of Atlantis first appears in the Timaeus. In it, Socrates asks his friends to give him a real-world example of a perfect society in action. A man named Critias steps up, claiming he is just the story one he heard from his grandfather, who heard it from the great Athenian statesman Solon. And where did Solon get it? From Egyptian priests, who had records of history stretching back thousands of years. This whole chain of he heard it from him, who heard it from them, is a clever literary device. By saying the story comes from the ancient and revered Egyptians, via the wise Solon, Plato gives his tale an air of incredible authority. He's essentially saying, listen up, this isn't just something I cooked up. This is ancient wisdom. It's a classic trick to pull the audience in. The follow-up dialogue, the Critias, is where the city of Atlantis is described in breathtaking detail. But remember the setup. The entire reason the story is being told is to serve as a philosophical example in a bigger debate. It's a story with a purpose, and that purpose isn't to give you directions to a sunken continent. To understand Atlantis, you have to understand Plato. The secret isn't about geography. It's about philosophy. Part 3. Plato's Tale, a detailed recounting. To really get what Plato was doing, we have to look at the story he actually told, not the blockbuster movie version. So let's follow the account given by his narrator, Critias. The story is presented as a true history of a war that happened 9,000 years before his time. The narrative kicks off with the gods dividing up the earth. The region of Athens was given to the goddess Athena, while the island of Atlantis went to Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes. This immediately sets up the two main characters of the drama, ancient Athens and Atlantis. Critias first describes the Athens of this prehistoric age. This wasn't the Athens Plato knew. This was an idealized proto-Athens, a perfect society that embodied all of his philosophical ideals. Its citizens were virtuous, brave, and lived in a perfectly ordered state. They were the heroes of the story. Then, Critias turns to their rival, and the level of detail he gives is just staggering. This is where the legend is born. The god Poseidon fell in love with a mortal woman, Cleito. On a hill in the center of his island, he built their home. To protect her, he literally sculpted the landscape, creating a series of perfect, concentric rings of land and water, 2 of land and 3 of sea, that circled the central hill. This became the capital of Atlantis. The descendants of Poseidon and Cleito ruled Atlantis for generations. The eldest, Atlas, was the first king, and that's where the island and the Atlantic Ocean get their names. The kingdom was a federation of 10 states, all ruled by kings who were bound by the laws laid down by Poseidon himself. The island was a marvel. Beyond the city was a vast fertile plain, protected by beautiful mountains. This plain was irrigated by a massive man-made canal that crisscrossed the landscape, allowing for 2 harvests a year. The city was even more impressive. The kings built bridges to connect the rings of land and carved a great canal, 300 feet wide and 100 feet deep, that ran for 5 miles from the sea right into the central harbor. They built temples, palaces, and docks on a massive scale. And the details Plato gives us through Critias are incredibly precise. He describes the walls lining the rings of the city. The outer wall was coated in brass, the middle in tin, and the inner wall of the citadel flashed with the red light of orichalcum. This mysterious metal was said to be second only to gold in value. The wealth of Atlantis was limitless. They had every resource you could imagine from their own island and their vast empire, which Plato says ruled over other islands and parts of modern-day Africa and Europe. The central temple to Poseidon was a wonder. It was about 600 feet long, covered entirely in silver with golden spires. Inside, the roof was ivory, decorated with gold, silver, and orichalcum, and it held a colossal golden statue of Poseidon in a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, so tall it touched the ceiling. For many generations, the Atlanteans held on to their virtue. They were wise and looked down on their vast riches. But it wasn't meant to last. The divine part of their nature faded as they mixed with mortals. Their human character took over. They became filled with, as Plato writes, unrighteous avarice and power. They became a decadent imperialistic power, hell-bent on world domination. This is the turning point. The mighty Atlantean Empire launched its invasion to subjugate the Mediterranean. But they met their match in the small but virtuous city of prehistoric Athens. The Athenians led a coalition that fought back, and when their allies deserted them, they stood alone, fought bravely, and defeated the invaders. It's at this exact moment that Zeus, king of the gods, seeing the corruption of Atlantis, gathered the other gods to deliver his judgment. And then, Plato's dialogue, the Critias, just stops. It's unfinished. To find out what happens, we have to go back to the Timaeus, where the story was first summarized. There, we're told of the end. After the war, there were violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis ... disappeared in the depths of the sea. This is the story as Plato wrote it. A detailed, epic narrative of 2 cities, one small and just, the other vast and corrupt. It certainly feels like history, but what if it was never meant to be taken literally? What if the truth isn't in the details of the canals, but in the message? Okay, we are now at the absolute heart of the mystery. We've heard the legend, we've met the source, and we've recounted the original tale. If you are finding this investigation as fascinating as I am, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. We go down historical rabbit holes like this all the time, and you won't want to miss what's next, because this is where we uncover the twist. Part 4. The What Really Happened twist, the allegory. For 2 millennia, people have been obsessed with the details, the rings, the orichalcum, the elephants, and have missed the entire point. The reason the Critias cuts off right before Zeus speaks is maybe the biggest clue of all. The story wasn't about the judgment of the gods. The story was the judgment. The purpose of Atlantis wasn't to document history. It was to create a powerful philosophical allegory. An allegory is a story where the characters and events are symbols for something else, usually a moral or political idea. And the story of Atlantis is one of the grandest allegories ever written. It was a thought experiment, a cautionary tale that Plato created for a very specific audience, the people of Athens in the 4th century BC. He wasn't looking back 9,000 years. He was holding up a mirror to his own society. Let's break down the symbols. The 2 warring cities, Atlantis and ancient Athens, aren't just cities. They are two opposing ideas. Ancient Athens, in the story, represents Plato's ideal state. This is the same perfect society he describes in his most famous work, The Republic. It's governed by reason and justice. It's communal, not individualistic. Its citizens are disciplined and immune to the temptations of wealth. This city is the hero. Atlantis, on the other hand, is everything Plato hated. It is a commercial, naval, and imperial power. Does that sound familiar? To any Athenian at the time, it would have. It was a thinly veiled portrait of Athens itself, or at least the parts of Athens that Plato thought were leading it to ruin. A century before Plato, Athens had its own powerful naval empire. It grew incredibly wealthy. It became arrogant and expansionist, leading to disastrous military campaigns that ultimately crippled the city. Atlantis is a caricature of a decadent empire. Its obsession with wealth and luxury comes at the cost of its soul. Its power leads to hubris, that dangerous Greek concept of pride that provokes the wrath of the gods. The story of Atlantis' moral decay was a direct warning to Plato's peers. He was saying, look at what we become when we lose our moral compass. So, the war between Atlantis and Athens isn't a historical event. It's a philosophical battle. The ideal state versus the corrupt state, virtue versus vice, moderation versus excess. And in Plato's story, the small moral state wins, proving that moral strength is greater than material power. The sinking of Atlantis is the final punchline. The island being destroyed by earthquakes and floods is a powerful metaphor for how civilizations, no matter how advanced, will ultimately collapse if they're built on injustice and arrogance. It's not a geological report. It's a moral verdict. This also explains the crazy time frame 9,000 years. By setting it in the impossibly distant past, he's signaling that this isn't normal history. It's myth. It gives him the freedom to build his perfect philosophical argument without being tied down by facts. So what really happened to Atlantis? It never sank because it was never a physical place. Atlantis was an idea, a philosophical construction. It was born in Plato's mind, served its purpose as an allegory, and was supposed to end there. The lost city was never lost. It's always been right where Plato left it, in the pages of his dialogues. The hunt for a physical Atlantis is based on a complete misreading of the author's intent. It's like reading George Orwell as Animal Farm and then launching an expedition to find a real farm run by talking pigs. The search is a distraction from the profound message the story was meant to teach. Part 5. Exploring and debunking other theories. Now, the consensus among most scholars is clear. Atlantis is a myth Plato created. However, that has never stopped people from trying to find it. The pull of a lost paradise is just too strong. So, let's look at some of the most popular theories and see how they hold up. The most famous, and for a while, most plausible theory connects Atlantis to the Bronze Age Minoan civilization on Crete and the nearby volcanic island of Thera, now Santorini. Around 1600 BC, the volcano on Thera erupted with unbelievable force, one of the largest in human history. It vaporized much of the island and triggered massive tsunamis that slammed the coast of Crete. The powerful Minoan civilization went into decline around this time. On the surface, the parallels are tempting. An advanced island civilization with a strong navy, wiped out by a cataclysm. But there are critical flaws. First, the timeline is way off. Plato specifically says Atlantis sank 9,000 years before his time, around 9600 BC. The Thera eruption was around 1600 BK, a difference of 8,000 years. Second, the location is wrong. Plato says Atlantis was in the Atlantic Ocean, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. Santorini is in the Aegean Sea. And third, the scale is all wrong. Plato's Atlantis was larger than Libya and Asia Minor put together. Santorini was a small island. The Thera eruption might have given Plato some ideas for his cataclysm, but it can't be Atlantis. More recently, this is where the debate gets interesting. Attention has shifted to a place that actually fits Plato's geography, the coast of Spain, just outside the Pillars of Hercules. Researchers, using sonar and other tech, claim to have found large, submerged circular structures near Cadiz that they believe match Plato's description of the city. They argue these formations in a seismically active area could be the ruins of a city destroyed by a tsunami. This theory is intriguing because it gets the location right. However, while these findings have sparked renewed debate, they remain controversial and unproven in the wider archaeological community. Critics argue that natural geology can often look man-made, and much more evidence is needed. And then you have the more fringe theories. Over the years, people have claimed to find Atlantis everywhere. From the Bimini Road in the Bahamas to the Richard structure in Mauritania, a geological dome that looks like concentric rings from space. Some have even proposed Antarctica. These theories almost always work by cherry-picking one or two details from Plato, while ignoring everything else that doesn't fit. They lack credible evidence and aren't taken seriously by historians. The problem with all these theories is that they start from the assumption that Plato was describing a real place. They try to force a 2,400-year-old philosophical tale to fit a modern discovery. They're trying to solve the wrong mystery. The evidence overwhelmingly suggests the only real-world inspiration for Atlantis was the politics of 4th century BC Athens. And the only location was Plato's own brilliant imagination. So, we come back to our original question. What really happened to the lost city of Atlantis? The answer is both simple and profound. Nothing happened to it because it was never a physical city. The legend of a great civilization sinking beneath the waves is one of the most powerful myths in history. But the truth is that Atlantis was never lost. It was created. It was created by Plato as a masterful work of political philosophy, a fictional parable meant to illustrate his deepest beliefs about justice, arrogance, and the ideal society. Atlantis was the villain of his story, a symbol of a nation consumed by greed and power, destined to destroy itself. Its opponent, the mythical ancient Athens, was his vision of a perfect republic, winning not through military might, but through moral character. For over 2,000 years, we've been looking for Atlantis in all the wrong places. We have searched the ocean floors and scanned satellite images, all while the real Atlantis was waiting patiently in the library. The search for a physical city is a testament to how good Plato's storytelling was, but it misses the entire point. He didn't give us a treasure map, he gave us a moral compass. The legacy of Atlantis isn't lost technology or sunken gold. Its true legacy is its timeless warning that any society, no matter how powerful, that lets greed overpower wisdom is doomed to fall. The story of Atlantis is not about a city we've lost, but about a truth we are in constant danger of forgetting. And maybe the most important question isn't where Atlantis was, but whether we, in our own time, are heeding its warning. What are your thoughts? Do you believe Atlantis was a real place, or do you agree it was a philosophical lesson? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this journey into one of history's greatest mysteries, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications for more explorations into the secrets of our past. Thank you for watching.